Across Eastern Europe, a quiet shift is unfolding, with the United States signaling a withdrawal of support for civil society initiatives in several post-Soviet states, including the closure of USAID offices. Countries like Moldova and Georgia now face what analysts call a funding vacuum. But this is more than a budgetary gap. It is a geopolitical opening. And in the contested spaces between Brussels and Moscow, openings rarely remain neutral for long. For decades, Western funding mechanisms, particularly through development agencies, supported media pluralism, anti-corruption watchdogs, and institutional reform in post-Soviet democracies. These initiatives were not purely humanitarian. They were strategic, reinforcing governance standards aligned with Euro-Atlantic institutions. Now, with reduced financial engagement and quieter diplomatic messaging from Washington, local reform networks face contraction. The vacuum is not simply financial, it is symbolic. The perception of reduced Western engagement often reshapes domestic political calculations faster than policy changes themselves. When external scrutiny softens, internal shifts accelerate. In Moldova and Georgia, critics argue that internal crackdowns on opposition voices and independent media are intensifying. What stands out is not only the domestic policy trajectory, but the muted tone of external criticism. In previous years, governance concerns would prompt firm statements from Washington and European capitals. Today, messaging appears more cautious. That recalibration may reflect broader strategic negotiations with Moscow over European security architecture. But in smaller states, it sends a powerful signal. When accountability mechanisms weaken externally, internal power consolidation becomes less costly. This dynamic reflects a broader regional pattern where political leaders test boundaries in moments of geopolitical distraction. Nowhere is vulnerability more pronounced than in Transnistria. The breakaway region, backed historically by Russian presence, sits as a frozen conflict zone on Moldova's eastern edge. As Washington and Moscow renegotiate elements of broader European security architecture, smaller contested regions risk becoming bargaining variables. If spheres of influence return as an accepted diplomatic framework, Transnistria could shift from frozen dispute to active leverage point. For Moldova, this creates structural insecurity. For Europe, it raises a deeper question. Can gray zones remain stable in an era of renewed power politics? Unresolved territorial disputes often become pressure valves in moments of great power recalibration. Amid these shifts, Germany faces a strategic dilemma. As the transatlantic rift over regional security deepens, Berlin must redefine its role. For decades, German foreign policy operated within a predictable U.S.-anchored framework, but uncertainty in Washington forces European capitals to reassess strategic autonomy. Should Germany expand defense commitments eastward? Should it lead EU stabilization efforts independently? Or should it hedge between transatlantic continuity and continental self-reliance? The answer will shape Eastern Europe's trajectory. If Berlin steps forward, gray zones may stabilize under European leadership. If hesitation persists, external actors will fill the space. The language of spheres of influence once belonged to history, but in 2026, it has re-entered strategic vocabulary. If the U.S. prioritizes selective engagement and Europe struggles with unified response, regional states may find themselves navigating informal zones of accommodation. This does not necessarily mean overt control. It means calibrated influence, political alignment without formal integration, security guarantees without institutional expansion. For Moldova and Georgia, the future may depend less on declarations and more on positioning within these emerging gray zones. Beyond politics and security, economic leverage plays a decisive role. Moldova's energy dependence and regional transit corridors remain strategic vulnerabilities. Infrastructure links, from electricity grids to rail and road networks, are increasingly viewed through a geopolitical lens. If influence shifts from institutional integration to transactional alignment, energy pricing, infrastructure investment, and trade access may become negotiation tools. In this environment, economic resilience becomes inseparable from sovereignty. And for gray zone states, diversification is no longer an economic strategy alone. It is a security imperative. Eastern Europe's gray zones are not collapsing. They are recalibrating. Reduced Western engagement creates openings. Muted criticism shifts incentives. And unresolved regions like Transnistria gain strategic weight. Germany's decisions in Europe's cohesion will determine whether these states drift toward influence-based accommodation or remain anchored to institutional integration. In geopolitics, vacuums do not remain empty. They are filled. The question is by whom? For deeper analysis on Eastern Europe's strategic future, transatlantic realignment, and the evolving security architecture of Europe, visit nexusinsight.org. Explore the Nexus Insight blog for expert insights, in-depth research, and contextual analysis on the forces shaping the global economy and international relations. Subscribe.